comments on Hiroshima Day, that I wouldn't participate. It's imperative that not only that I speak. It's not imperative that I speak. I'm just one person. It's imperative that things like this take place, and it's an honor and a privilege to be considered as a voice worthy of being heard in such company. But this isn't about me or any of the speakers up there. It's about the American people. I mean, this is about, because let's just be frank here. We're the problem. There's no other problem in the world today. We're the problem. The rest of the world is the solution. We can sit down with the Russians at any time we choose, and we can resolve this nuclear issue through verifiable arms control. I've done it in the past. I think that's one of the reasons why my voice might be relevant here. Because when we speak about the potential of disarmament, I don't deal with theory. Screw theory. I deal with reality. I did it. Been there, done it, got the t-shirt. We can do it again. It's not impossible. Is it hard? Hell yeah. Any good thing's hard. It's going to be really hard, especially now that we have to win back the trust and confidence of the Russian people and the Russian government. We have to coerce the Chinese, in the proper sense of the term, in a good sense of the term, get them to want to sit down with us. Why would the Chinese want to talk with us right now? Why in God's name would anybody want to talk with the United States? We are liars. We are cheaters. We are manipulators. Every treaty that we have signed, we have pulled out of, or we are in violation of. We are headed on a highway to hell. I wish we could get AC/DC to play that as our theme song, because that is exactly what's going on. We are on a one-way trip to hell, supercharged. It's over. I don't mean to be too blatant and callous here, but it's over. Their issue through verifiable arms control. I've done it in the past. I think that's one of the reasons why my voice might be relevant here. Because when we speak about the potential of disarmament, I don't deal with theory. Screw theory. I deal with reality. I did it. Been there, done it, got the t-shirt. We can do it again. It's not impossible. Is it hard? Hell yeah. Any good thing's hard. It's going to be really hard, especially now that we have to win back the trust and confidence of the Russian people and the Russian government. We have to coerce the Chinese, in the proper sense of the term, in a good sense of the term, get them to want to sit down with us. Why would the Chinese want to talk with us right now? Why in God's name would anybody want to talk with the United States? We are liars. We are cheaters. We are manipulators. Every treaty that we have signed, we have pulled out of, or we are in violation of. We are headed on a highway to hell. I wish we could get AC/DC to play that as our theme song, because that is exactly what's going on. We are on a one-way trip to hell, supercharged. It's over. I don't mean to be too blatant and callous here, but it's over unless we do something about it. And if you're waiting for the big moment, the million people, the 5 million people, and you're waiting for that to happen before you get involved, you don't understand how you get 1 million people in the street. You get 1 million people in the street, one person at a time. And it begins with meetings like this, gatherings like this, where we begin the process of informing and educating people, showing that there is a viable coalition of like-minded, diverse thinkers. There are going to be people up there that might not otherwise want to be on the same stage with one another, because they might have differences of opinion about other issues. But it doesn't matter, because those differences of opinion will melt away like the skin on your body when a nuclear bomb goes off. It doesn't matter. All the petty stuff that we do out here in life, all the little petty political differences are irrelevant, because once it goes flash, boom, bang, we're all equal. As Roger Waters sang in his song, Two Suns in the Sunset. We're all equal in the end, because we're all going to die. That's what we all have in common. So, yeah, I'm thrilled to have the opportunity to do this. I'm going to have to find a way to tone down because I'm about as angry as a man can get against the American people and the American government right now. And I have to be really careful when I speak out, because the Marine in me wants just to wade into the crowd and punch them all in the face and wake them up. because that's what it's really going to take. They need to have their teeth knocked out, their nose smashed in, be laying on their knees, spitting blood, going, what the hell just happened? I would say, at least you're alive. Because when you get in the face by the nuclear blast, you won't be alive. And your complacency in the face of this, this colossal failure of leadership that's taking place here in the United States. It's the complacency of the average American citizen. We aren't citizens. We aren't the wonderful individuals that the founding fathers thought of when they created this nation. We are a nation of sheep, and we are literally being guided by a shepherd called the nuclear establishment towards the slaughterhouse. And it's okay, because the nuclear establishment, they want this. They need this. They live for this. They are so self-delusional that they believe they can win a nuclear war, that nuclear wars are winnable. So they have no fear because they think they're going to ride this thing out. These are sick people who think that a victory in a nuclear war can be achieved by losing only 90 to 100 million Americans. 90 to 100 million Americans vaporized, and we won the war because we vaporized more of them than they vaporized of us. This is an illness. It's a mental illness. And the only treatment for it is through the vehicle of democracy. Vote them the hell out of existence. And it requires us to start picking good leaders to represent us, get people like Diane Sare in the Senate, get people in the House of Representatives, maybe get somebody like RFK Jr. in the White House. Who knows? Is he perfect candidate? There is no such thing as the perfect candidate. Is he flawed on several issues? You're damn right he is. Do I have disagreements with him on certain things? I do. And I would love to have the opportunity in the coming years to work through these disagreements with Bobby. But in order to do that, I have to be breathing air, which means I have to be alive, which means there can't be a nuclear war. And there's going to be a nuclear war. People don't get it. There's going to be a nuclear war. Think about our Ukraine policy in a nutshell right now. It's the insanity of it. Russia has a nuclear posture that says, if you threaten the existence of Russia, we will use all means at our disposal, including nuclear weapons, to deal with that threat. An existential threat to Russia includes stripping territories that Russia deems to be part of Russia away from Russia. So you have Ukraine saying they want to carry out a counteroffensive, the purpose of which is to rip the territories that Russia has annexed. Now, we can get into a political discussion about annexation if you would like to. But again, in order to have that discussion, we have to be alive, breathing. Right now, Russia says this belongs to us. Crimea belongs to us. If you try to take it away from us by use of force, we will use nuclear weapons to defend ourselves, which means the end of the world. And yet that's what Ukraine is doing, and we're the ones supporting it. We're sitting there saying, yeah, do it. We think this is a good idea. So Biden says, I don't think the Russians are serious about using nuclear weapons. The Russians are serious about using it. Let me make this very, very clear. If there is a threat to Russia, for instance, a threat to Crimea, Russia will use nuclear weapons in response. These weapons won't be launched against Ukraine. They'll be launched against NATO nations. They'll be launched against London, Paris, Brussels. And if that happens, then the question is, what is the United States going to do? Are we going to respond in kind? Hit a Russian site. The second we hit a Russian site, every Russian nuke in the world goes off aiming at us because we miscalculated. You see, we think we can actually escalate to de-escalate. It's not theory on my part. We know this because we've practiced it. This is why we produced the W76-2 low-yield nuclear weapon that we put on top of Trident nuclear missile on an Ohio-class submarine. And we had a Secretary of Defense, Mark Espers, practice launching it in a scenario based upon a Russian attack against the Baltics, where we practiced launching a nuclear weapon against Russian forces in Russia. Now, the assumption was that by bang, making it go off and killing a bunch of Russian soldiers, the Russians got scared, panicked, and said, oh my God, we quit, we surrender, we alter our behavior. But in reality, that won't happen. Every Russian weapon will be launched. They won't launch it in waves, they'll launch it all at once, and the world will end. It's over. Within 30 to 40 minutes after that decision being made, none of us will be here. And those who live will wish they hadn't lived. If you manage to survive the immediacy of the nuclear blast, and remember, these are missiles that are going to hit every major population center in America. There will not be a major urban area in America left. If you live out in rural Kansas, you may get to live maybe a day, 2, 3 days more, but then the radioactive cloud's going to come in. But before the radioactive cloud hits you, you're not going to see the sunlight again because all of this dirt and nonsense is going to be sucked up into the jet stream. And within a day, the world's going to be blanketed in a thick layer of ash, radioactive ash, that's going to be falling down on everybody while it shields them from the sunlight. Is that really what we want? Because that's what's going to happen. Literally. No one will live.
Now,
So, yeah, I think speaking on August 6th is probably a thing that needs to be done if you're serious about trying to stop this.
does Biden, Harris, the senators, and Congress people know the dire consequences? Really know the dire consequences if there is a nuclear war? Do they know it? Do they understand it?
Nope, not a single one.
You don't think so?
I know so. If they did, they wouldn't be doing what they're doing. You don't play these games. It's like saying, I understand the lethal impact of a 38 caliber bullet while I put it into a chamber, spin it, put it to my head, and pull the trigger. If I'm playing Russian roulette with a loaded pistol, I don't understand what's going on, or I'm suicidal. All right, so we have to decide, are American leaders suicidal, or do they not understand what they're doing? And here's the thing, you know, this is, I don't want to give away the Oppenheimer film because I think everybody should see it. I think it's an important film to see. But I wanted that film to scare me, and it didn't. That film educated me. I feel I have more insight into who Oppenheimer is and the politics of that surrounded the decision to manufacture. But I didn't leave the theater scared. And that's the problem. You see, I grew up scared. I grew up fearful of nuclear weapons. They were a ever-present reality. I lived next door to a nuclear weapons storage facility in West Germany that was going to be the #1 place hit by Soviet nuclear weapons when the war started. And while I lived there as a high school student, a war almost started several times. I mean, I told this story before, I'll tell it again. There was a book, Alas Babylon, about nuclear conflict, and that was the code name that an Air Force officer would send to his family to say, the missiles are flying, it's over, I love you, goodbye. Well, my parents used that same phrase. On 2 occasions, my dad called my mom from the bunk saying, Alas Babylon, which means gather the kids, be together because it's about to end. All right, this was real. I would go to school in the morning, not sure if there would be anything left when I came home, if I came home. This was very visceral. I was in the Marine Corps in a nuclear capable unit. We practiced firing nuclear artillery rounds in combat scenarios to make sure that when the time came to do it, we could do it and we would do it. And I'm here to guarantee you, if we had been given the order, we would have launched. No questions asked. That's the world we live in. And I would thank God that he gave me the opportunity to participate in the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, the one treaty, the first treaty to get rid of nuclear weapons and save the world from this one-way trip they were taking back in the 1980s. See, I've seen it all. I've been there, I've done it. And I'm looking today and we're on the same path. But there's nobody afraid anymore. No one's afraid. You say it was great to have these young kids going to the movie. No, it wasn't. Because they left the theater not afraid. They left the theater entertained. They left the theater, pardon?
because, of course, we heaven forbid we have anyone who's deemed pro-Russia or wants good relations with Russia at the head of the Department of Defense. But we're going to be having a full conversation with him today, about 40 minutes, 40 minutes. So we got that coming. And before we do that, I want to say a big thank you to our sponsor for today's stream. But first, I want to remind you all to be sure to drop a like on this stream, subscribe to our program for more great conversations and to help us boost in YouTube's corporate algorithm. But today, we have the amazing sponsor, Noble Gold Investments. So big thanks to Noble Gold Investments for supporting our program. If you'd like, you can check them out using the link in the description of our live stream. So if you're watching here, just scroll down and you'll see this first link that says Visit Noble Gold. Click on that link. It'll take you to the Noble Gold website, hinklegold.com, where you can fill out your basic information, first name, last name, email, and it'll get you started on your road to financial freedom and protection, okay? Because they're going to help you invest in gold, in silver IRAs, or 401ks. At a time when Putin and Russia and Xi Jinping and China are buying up gold like crazy, like never before, and at a time when the dollar, frankly, is in demise, now would be a good time for you to check out my friends at Noble Gold, all right? The U.S. dollar, for those of you who don't, by clicking on the percent of your donation. Colonel, can you hear stuff? So bear with me for a second. How you doing today?
As long as you don't ask me for technical help, fine.
Sounds good.
I'm not good at it either.
I'll take note of that. Well, I just gave you a great intro. I don't know if you heard it, but we're very happy to have you back here again. I think this is the third time we've talked. And, for anyone who doesn't know, Colonel Douglas Macgregor is a man who served our country for many, many years, most recently as the senior advisor to Trump's Pentagon, the Defense Department. And if you want to learn more about Colonel Douglas Macgregor and all the great things that he is doing and has done throughout his life, you can check out the link that I pinned in the description or in the live chat. That's going to take you to his website where you'll see all his amazing work, his bio, and his most recent book, Margin of Victory. So, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, thank you for joining us on the show today.
Happy to be here.
Well, we've got a lot to talk about. It seems like the world is crumbling right before our very eyes. I'd first like to start off with your thoughts on this Ukrainian counteroffensive, because we heard so much of it for so long. Well, first it was supposed to be a spring counteroffensive. That never materialized. And now it seems as though this is really going nowhere. It's not changing the face of this war. The only thing that's changing is the tally of bodies, sadly, that are piling up on both sides of this war. What are your thoughts on this Ukrainian counteroffensive? Do you expect any breakthroughs? Have you seen anything you would deem a breakthrough? And where do you think this is headed and for how long?
Well, that's a mouthful. I think I can answer some of it very easily. I just received some overhead surveillance material from Ukraine, and the overhead surveillance photographs or pictures show 123,000 freshly dug graves. And the estimate at the bottom of the picture is that 400,000 Ukrainian soldiers have been killed thus far.
Wow.
So I think to sum up the counteroffensive is a fairly straightforward affair. It's gone absolutely nowhere. It's achieved nothing. And the sad part is that, and I blame this to some extent on NATO and on the military advice that they've received, particularly from the Americans and the British. Ukrainians have been trying to refight World War II, and they're operating in a fundamentally different environment. I mean, if you listen to Petraeus and the others talk, they say, oh, well, they've mastered combined arms warfare, and they've got this right and that right. The problem is that we live in a different world today, and today the world is as follows. Nothing happens anywhere in eastern Ukraine, or for that matter, even in western Ukraine, but certainly in eastern Ukraine right now where the war is being fought, that the Russians cannot instantly see, that they can't instantly track and ultimately target. The only issue for them is whether they're going to target it or not, and that depends on whether they see it as presenting a threat, and they've got an array of systems with which they can strike. It's not dependent on weather, because the weather doesn't interfere. It's simply a fact of life that the combination of highly
improved high-definition surveillance, whether it's thermal imagery or any number of other types, you can't hide anymore. That's the first thing. So you're operating in an environment where your opponent sees everything. Now, we've provided the Ukrainians with a great deal of information, but I don't think our downlinks to them are as good as what the Russians have. And that's because the Russians have learned over time to link the overhead surveillance, the space-based surveillance, the terrestrial surveillance with all of their strike systems. So you have near instantaneous identification and decision on whether or not it's going to be targeted. And this runs from the tactical level, which may only involve a mile or two of surveillance, all the way up to strategic surveillance, which reaches hundreds of miles, even 1,000 miles. And so from the very beginning, the Ukrainians have been dealing with this, but they've been dealing with it as though it didn't exist, even though they've learned that the integrated air defenses, which is part of this precision paradigm, has effectively emptied the airways. There's nothing above them. They can't fly. If we were involved in this war, we couldn't fly. We'd lose most of our aircraft. And this is something that people don't understand. I hear American generals say, well, if we just send in B-52s, each B-52 drops 90 500-pound bombs, we'll smash all these defenses. Well, good luck. Because as soon as they're within range of the air defenses, they'll be shot out of the sky. They'll never reach the point. It's a different kind of warfare. The second thing is that the Ukrainians have been focused by us on territory. You've got to drive out the Russians, get that territory back. Well, in reality, the Russians have not been interested in territory. They've been interested in destroying the Ukrainian armed forces. In other words, killing the Ukrainian army. That's the problem. The Ukrainians have not been focused on destroying the Russian army. They've been focused on trying to get back terrain. It's a waste of time. Terrain is only valuable insofar as it gives you an advantage. If there's no advantage to holding it, it doesn't have any value. The Russians understand that from 1,000 years of history of dealing with Mongolian armies and every other conceivable form of warfare, but the Ukrainians haven't learned it. I blame us for that problem. But the bottom line is it's gone nowhere. It's not going to go anywhere. And I think at this point, the Ukrainian army is really broken. And there's a difference between a defeated army and a broken army. The army of Northern Virginia was defeated, but it held together to the bitter end and ultimately was surrendered. It wasn't very large by the time it surrendered, 15, 20,000 men, but it held together. It was surrendered by its leader, Lee, and the war ended. How do you end this war when the leadership no longer really has control over what the forces in the field are doing? The forces in the field are melting away. The resistance is dying out. Why? Because people are tired of dying. We've transformed Ukraine into a graveyard. We've transformed the Ukrainian army into cannon fodder. And we're telling them, go out, launch this attack, get us a few kilometers of terrain. That'll show NATO and our donors that we're still alive. Well, it's insane. Makes no sense. And people in Washington and the NATO capitals are inhumane. This is beyond reason. This is no longer a war. This is just slaughter. And the sooner we understand that, the sooner we can end it. But we're not going to humiliate Russia. We're not going to subjugate Russia. The Russians are not going to bow down for forgiveness. Putin is not going to jail. There will be no regime change. This is all crap. And the problem is that we don't seem to understand that they're not the people who are responsible. We are. This could have been over quite early. You'll recall, I'm sure some of your viewers recall, that the Ukrainian negotiating team at the end of March, beginning of April said, yeah, we can live with neutrality, which was the principal concern the Russians have always had. They didn't want a NATO forward operating base on their border designed to attack them. Very simple. Well, that was rejected. And so here we sit. And everyone's convinced the Russians want to march all the way to Warsaw and Berlin. No, they don't. They are not interested in that at all. If they were interested in that, they'd be moving right now on Kiev. I think they're waiting to see what happens next, and then they'll move. But they don't want to govern Ukrainians. They know the Ukrainians don't want to be part of Russia. That was never the point. But now they've secured those areas that are Russian, that have Russians living in them. So they no longer are an oppressed people inside Ukraine. That was the number one consideration. And they're destroying this, they call it the neo-Nazi force, It's certainly a heinous group of people that have done terrible things to Russian prisoners and Russian people, no question about it. But, you know, the Russians have done something very brilliant. They've always treated the Ukrainians that surrendered with great kindness. They have never mistreated the Ukrainians at all. And as a result, the Ukrainian officer looks around, he tries to evacuate the 50 wounded men that he's got. And they say, well, I'm sorry, you can't do that. We can't evacuate them. And so he says, I'm not going to let my men die. Calls the Russians say, of course. And this is happening. And it's not a surprise, but this army is broken. It's a broken vessel now. No amount of supplies are going to change that reality.
That's, I mean, from what I've seen, that appears to be the truth. No amount of supplies, no amount of money is going to change the reality. And granted, a lot of those supplies and funds are being siphoned off to Ukrainian, oligarchs and elite. I'm curious, though. No one in the White House, no one in the State Department right now, maybe some in the Pentagon, are really looking for a way out, an off-ramp in this. And I know that's been the discussion all along. Where is the off-ramp? With the candidacy of President Donald J. Trump, someone who you served under as senior advisor to the Pentagon, do you feel hopeful in his plight to end this altercation, this war, within the first 24 hours? Do you think that that's actually possible?
Well, I think a number of things could be done quickly, and he could do them. But right now, his life is a living hell.
Yeah.
And I don't know what happens over the next several months. I mean, I wouldn't want to trade places with him under any circumstances. It's incomprehensible to me that we as a nation allow this nonsense to go on. The nonsense machine in Washington is out of control. But there are a couple of other things that need to be borne in mind. I don't think anybody in the administration, and even people at the top of the Pentagon, really understand that you don't build an army on the fly. You don't just bring in tons of equipment, put a lot of people on it and say, all right, now you're an army. It's ridiculous. It takes a long time to do it. A general officer I served under who's now passed away, he was a very great man. His name was Otis, General Otis, and he once said, the profession of arms is really very, very difficult. Building military power as we're trying to do it, and he was trying back in the early 80s, is very difficult to do it. He said, if it wasn't that tough, we'd contract it out. We don't get it. We've contracted the war out to Ukraine, literally. We've said, here's your stuff, here's cash. We've ignored the corruption. We've ignored the 60, 70,000 children that have gone missing as a result of this war. God knows where they are. We've ignored every conceivable ugly feature of this campaign with one goal in mind. We're going to destroy Russia. And it hasn't worked. It's not going to work. But for the neocons and the globalists, and they've blended into one cabal right now, this is an existential fight. If Russia survives and flourishes, well, your attempt to destroy the last European power that has a viable national identity, a real national language, a national culture, a history that cannot be rewritten, borders that will not open, that refuses to be assimilated by the rest of the world as opposed to preserving itself, will have been lost. They will have lost the fight. And see, they're looking at West Europe right now in terrible condition, economically, socially, as a huge success story. We've overrun France and Germany and Italy with all of these people from the Middle East and Africa and, Southwest Asia. This is wonderful. We're overrunning the United States. We used to talk about millions from Latin America. Well, they're now in the minority. We have people coming from all over the world. We don't know anything about them. They're unvetted. They're marching into the country unmolested. We hand them a little slip of paper that tells them when they're supposed to show up for their court date. It's a joke. Criminality is brimming. So, we in the West are a big success story for the globalists. And this was their one good shot at destroying the holdout, Russia, which is obviously evil. Now, that's a pretty stiff problem right now to deal with. And I think the way that the administration is trying to do it, and you can see this, Jackson, when you go into the New York Times and some of the other leading newspapers, well, we've given the Ukrainians everything. There's not much more that we can do now. We've trained them. We've given them this. We've given them that. And I can already hear in the background, well, sorry, we gave you all we could. And, now it's time to turn attention to China. Oh, and by the way, China, that's a really big threat. Russia, well, it's not that big of a deal, but China, that's a really big deal. And nobody will stand up and say, well, if you don't like the fentanyl coming through the Mexican drug cartels into the United States, you don't go to war with China, you close the border.
Exactly.
You fight
Tucker Carlson
crime
made that
in
point.
America.
Yeah, I heard Tucker Carlson speak at in Palm Beach a few days ago. He made that point. He's like, how many Americans has Russia killed? 0, approximately, over the past several decades. What about Mexico through their fentanyl crisis? Tens of thousands every single year. We don't go to war with them. We simply deal with it through policy and diplomacy. It's just crazy. But you talk about China there. I saw a story just yesterday. The Biden administration is now working to use the legal loopholes they created through this endless taxpayer-funded supply of military arms to Ukraine to now try supply arms to Taiwan, something that they've already been doing, and they've been training Taiwanese special ops in Taiwan, from what I understand, with U.S. troops. How quick do you think that might materialize? Because I know they have their eyes set on China. I remember, I think it was the first conversation we have, I asked you the question, what do you think about this war with China? And you said, war with China is a fundamentally stupid idea. And I don't know how many times I've played that clip on my show because it's so true. That's the last thing I think the American public needs right now.
Well, I don't think we're going to benefit from war with anyone at the moment, especially since the nation is at war with itself. We've been in a cold war with the left now for decades. It's now beginning to turn hot. I don't know how hot it's going to get, but that's a far more important fight right now inside the United States than anything happening everywhere else. China is a strange place. We don't understand China. China might as well be on Mars or Jupiter. That's how much we understand the Chinese and their civilization. It's one of the oldest civilizations on the planet. It's the last country in the world that wants to go to war with us. It absolutely does not. There are 1.4 billion of them, perhaps 4 versions of the United States living inside this place called China. If you go to war with them, they'll fight and they'll defend themselves. And most of their forces and their capabilities are all designed to defend China. No question about it. And you'll end up in a situation where you're sitting outside the largest fortress in human history. And instead of having an equally large and powerful force attacking, you're going to be a Lilliputian force, hurling rocks and boulders at this giant fortress and expecting something to change. It's absurd. It's a complete waste of time. Chinese are about business. They're about making money. They have enormous problems with corruption and organized crime. Every morning, I'm sure Xi wakes up and he worries about 2 things. First of all, how do I hold this monstrous country together? 1.4 billion. We can't even begin to imagine that. Secondly, how do I deal with all the corruption? Every other general in the People's Liberation Army has his own string of factories producing everything from rubber dinosaurs to microcircuits. Good Lord, what do we think these people are about? They recently arrested, they probably executed him. I haven't followed up the man responsible for shipbuilding because the hulls he was building for the PLA had cracks in them. They weren't seaworthy. They've got a submarine fleet. They're trying to catch up with us, but submarine fleets like armies take decades. We have really the finest submarine fleet in the world when it's operating. Right now, 40% of it isn't functional. It's sitting in dry dock, which is not a good thing. And we don't have enough of them, by the way. We need more submarines. We don't need more surface ships because the same capability that can find you on land can find you at sea. So why build these big surface ships? But the submarines, they're vitally important. But the Chinese are fearful of what could happen to them. They're very reluctant to send them very far from Chinese coastlines for fear that they'll sink. So look, the Chinese aren't preparing for a war with us, but yes, they'll prepare to defend themselves. And Taiwan is a very sensitive item. Now, here's some good news. Both of the major parties on Taiwan, one is the old KMT, which is the Chiang Kai-shek's party.
Mhm.
That party has always, well, I shouldn't say always, but certainly for the last decade, been an advocate for reunification with the mainland. The other party is historically the pro-Japanese party. They were happy under Japanese rule and occupation, would be happy to continue to do so. But they're the ones that were talking about independence. Guess what? They've dropped it from their platform because they've been losing all of the elections in Taiwan because the population doesn't want a war with China. And people point to the microcircuitry that's produced on Taiwan, which is of exceptionally important capability for all of us. Well, they sell to China, to South Korea, and to Japan, as well as to us. Nobody wants to destroy that factory. Nobody. Now, Donald Trump very wisely wanted to build a similar factory in the United States and bent over backwards to bring the people from Taiwan that own it over here. Of course, as soon as Biden came in, that deal went down the toilet. And that's unfortunate because that was the right answer.
Yeah.
We need to reinvigorate our manufacturing, especially our high-end manufacturing, high-tech manufacturing. That's something that needs to happen. We're not doing it. We're busy trying to change the human composition of our armed forces to ensure that we have a majority of people who are not white and lots of women. And of course, that is vitally important to the security of this country. And how many R's are there in Fat Chance?
Yeah, it's insane. You know, someone with the ideas you had, and I talked about this, I talked about this with Robert Barnes on my program. God, I wish you could be on that ticket with Donald Trump. I really wish. I don't know if that's anything you'd ever even consider, but I really wish.
No, Jackson, I appreciate it. It's very nice of you to say that, but I have no wish to run for office. And, look, my whole life has really been focused on the profession of arms and the military. That's where I'm most comfortable. It's because of that I became so interested in foreign policy, because I was interested in what happened in the rest of the world. I never really wanted to wield power in domestic politics. I really don't. So, any America First government that comes to power, whether it's RFK Jr. or Donald Trump or anybody else, I'm happy to serve in it.
Mm-hmm.
But I just don't seek public office. People that want public office want power. I'm not really interested in that as much as I am in our country's security.
Well, I think you do a fine job, either wherever you land. I think you'll do a fine job. One question that has been on the minds of a lot of my viewers recently is everything that's unfolding, almost like a new Cold War. It's appearing to be in West Africa. We recently saw a coup in Niger. And now you have all these, I believe it's referred to as ECOWAS, which is like the band of West African states. Some of them are still pro-Western, some of them not, due to recent military coups and military juntas that have taken control, like in Burkina Faso, for example. But Russia has a lot of ties to these nations like Burkina Faso, Guinea, Mali, and of course, the new government in Niger. And Niger is now talking about bringing in Wagner forces all throughout the country. That was just reported on a few hours ago. They had a meeting in Mali yesterday. Do you foresee even a possibility of something unraveling there, like widespread fighting and war taking place between Western and Russian-backed powers in West Africa?
Well, most of Africa, tragically, is not a great place to live. It's very sad. And when they first created this thing called Africa Command, I was still on active duty. And I had the misfortune to open my big mouth in a room full of generals and others and say, what the hell are we calling this place AfricaCom for? Africa Command, are you crazy? If you were in Africa, what would you think about the United States if it created a military organization